Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Ayin Chet 78 in Masechet Sanhedrin. We are in the 9th chapter. Let me share my screen and we'll really get started. We are the 9th chapter, which is, we in the last couple of chapters, we discussed stoning and the various sins that one violates in order to be subject to stoning. And the last of those sins was the Ben Sorah Moreh, and that then triggered a whole chapter that was dedicated to that, and then related sins that just as Ben Sorah Umoreh is killed because of what he will become, so too there are other situations where we sort of the end result is what is triggers what we're going to do to somebody, and so that's dealt with the entire concept of Rodef. And then now we are in the chapter of dealing with the two different punishments. In this chapter, where we began the chapter by dealing with the Nisrafin, those are who are burned, and the second is Sayef, is a sword, those who are beheaded, and so that's what we're on at the moment. I'm sorry, it should have said in the second sentence here, we've already finished the review of burning, and we are in the middle of discussing murder, which is subject to beheading. So just to clarify what's on the screen. But, and so we're going to pick up now with the fourth line from the bottom of Ayin Zayin Amabet, and we highlight another case in which we say that the force with which an object is traveling is attributable to the one who threw it. We dealt with the sort of the rubber ball case, or the case of something bouncing against the wall, and noting that that's also considered the person's force of the person who threw it. And now we're going to deal with something that, where somebody is throwing something in the air and it hits somebody. So let's take a look. Fourth to last line on Ayin Zayin Amabet. V'amar Papa.
Also,
Sorry.
When we're talking about throwing the ball against the wall and the force, the Gemara also made a distinction between shogeg and mazid.
Yes. We're now dealing with somebody who's let's assume for the moment that in all cases we're dealing with somebody who is trying to kill the person that they are throwing the ball at, or including through a rebound. Meaning, if you are a good shot, thinking about a pool, and you have a good trick shot, and you know how to shoot the pool ball, and you do it at the right angle, and you get it into the hole. So same you get credit for having attempted that particular shot. So too, if you throw a rock against the wall or a bullet against a wall, and you intentionally have it rebound off the wall in order to hit somebody, and you are successful in doing so, we attribute to you the intention to kill. So that you're absolutely right that of course we're talking about somebody who's doing it intentionally, and that would obviously, if somebody was not doing it intentionally, we would deal with something different. But we're dealing with somebody who is intentionally trying to kill somebody at this moment. So va'amar Papa zarak sror lamala, if you throw a stone up into the air, we're fourth line. Now the third line on Ayin, from the bottom of Ayin Zayin Amabet, v'halcha litzdadin, and it goes to the side, meaning that you are not throwing it directly vertically into the air, v'harga, and it kills somebody, chayav, then you are going to be liable. V'halcha litzdadin, Rashi, second to last line from the bottom of the Rashi, derech nefilasa, that when it's falling, and it now is not going up any longer, Shenlo nafla kenegdo, it doesn't fall directly right next to the person, meaning right up, wherever he threw it from. Elakashehi chozeres laaretz, but when it goes down towards the ground, haisa misrachekes litzdadin, it's continuing to go away from the person. Aval im nafla nochacha b'harga putter, but if it fell directly and then it hits something, then you would be putter, because obviously you are the thing that is under the item when you throw it directly vertically up. And so as a result, there was nothing there at the moment. And so as a result, if it now falls and somebody walks in its way and gets hit by the thing that comes down, by the rock that comes down, you're going to be exempt. Delav kokohu, because that's not considered the person's strength. Elahi chozeres laaretz ma'aleha. It sort of returns back to the ground on its own. An interesting view of gravity. Now, I will note that although that is true, if you were to literally just drop something on somebody, you would still be chayiv. So it's important to note that distinction. Okay, so now back into the Gemara. So Amar le Marbar Rav Ashi le Rav Papa. So Marbar Rav Ashi asked the question, my time, why is the person going to be liable? Mishum Tekokohu, you're going to call this force the force that the person threw it with? But Ikoko, if his force is really still on that rock, Tezil Le'el, it should keep going. It should keep going up in the air, right? We're dealing with a situation where a person throws the rock in an upwards direction, but at an angle, like a football on in a football field. And now the point is that as a result, even though it was going up, it's now coming down. And so isn't that coming down a different force from the force that that was going up, and therefore shouldn't it not be included or not count as the thrower's force? So Rapapa responds, as we turn to Ayin Chedem Aleph, the Ilav Koko, if you're going to tell me it's not his force, well then Tezel Atachas, it should drop right away. Meaning there you can divide the force into a vertical component and a horizontal component. And even if the vertical component is no longer powering it to continue to go further from the ground, the vertical component, the horizontal component, is still in existence. Elakoa kakashu. It's, that force is, it still has the horizontal force, and so as a result, that is considered sufficient. Let's take a look at the top two Rashis on Ayin Chedem and Aleph. Ilav koko tezel atakas. If there was no other force, it should just drop. Tapel miyad, it should fall right away. Kenegda, right next to him. Below it studded, and not continue to the sides. Ela koa kakashu, but rather there's a weaker force. Eno koko chazak, it's not so strong. Ela ketzad koko, it's not all of the force with which he threw it, it's just part of the force with which he threw it. Yesh kan. V'hai delo azla le'el, the fact that it no longer goes up, mishum shekala koach chozek kazrika, because on some level, the force of going up has become weaker, meaning it's been overcome by gravity. And now the stone is going to return to the ground. But it's still continuing horizontally because it has part of his force. So, again, an interesting understanding of gravity and the like, because the truth is that the force with which you throw something up is the force that which it comes back to the ground. So on some level, one could almost view it like like throwing it against the wall, where we say that it's considered to still be their force. But in any event, I'm not going to go into the physics, and we'll just continue on. But this is the case that where the Gemara basically has concluded that if you throw it something vertically up, then you're not going to be considered liable. But if you throw something horizontally, you will be considered liable.
How does this ball get in the air? And it doesn't go magically. You have to throw it upwards to go up. Otherwise, you hold
Correct.
it just drops to the ground from the moment you let go of it.
Correct. Certainly, that's absolutely true. But again, the Gemara is distinguishing between a horizontal force and a vertical force. The vertical force, if it's going up, it's still attributed to you. But when it's going down, it's attributed effectively to gravity and not to you. Okay, so Tana Rabbanan. Hiku asara b'nei adam asara maklos umes. So now we're going to say, what have we highlighted? Just to back up a moment, we've highlighted a number of cases where even though a person did not use their full power to kill somebody, the person was killed, and we are going to attribute that killing to the murderer, to the attacker. now we're going to deal with a situation where what happens if there are multiple people involved? What's the story then? So that's the situation of the next brisa. So Tana Rabbanan, Hiku Hasara B'nei Adam B'Asara Maklos V'Meis. If 10 people hit a guy with 10 sticks, Bain Bivas Achas, Bain Bizachar, whether they hit at the same time or one after the other, Peturin, they are all not liable. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer Bizachar Ha'achron Chayev. But Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, well, if they hit each other, if they hit the person, the victim, one after the other, well, then the last one is going to be the one who's subject to be executed. Because he brings quickly, he makes happen more quickly the death of the victim. So Rabbi Yochanan, Ushneim Mikra Echad Darshu. And Rabbi Yochanan explains these two opinions, the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, as being both based on the same verse. And it's two different interpretations of that same verse. Because the verse says, V'ish ki yakeh kol nefesh adam, that when a person hits all of a human life, of a soul. So Rabbanan Savrei kol nefesh ad de'ika kol nefesh. The rabbis say that you need to kill somebody entirely. If you aren't the one who kills the person entirely, well, then you are not going to be liable because you had somebody else who did the killing with you. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Savar kol nefesh kol dehu nefesh. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, no, it's not. You have to kill an entire life. You need to kill whatever life exists. In both of these, both meanings can the word kol can have both meanings. So kol dehu nefesh. Take a look at Rashi, fourth narrow line on Ayin Chet Amud Aleph. Afilu miktsasa, even part of a person. Umiyu. However, so in second, so then you might be wondering, and Rashi's answering the question for us, why does Rabbi Yehuda agree that if the 10 people hit with the same person at the same time, do they none of them get the death penalty? Maybe they should all get the death penalty. After all, it says kol nefesh, so any amount of life that they take away from the person, as long as the person dies, they should all be chayiv. So no, when they all hit at the same times, lo katlina, we don't kill them, lekulu, to all of them, ish ki yakeh amar, because the Torah says ish, it says a singular person who hit somebody. Is what the Torah says. V'lo shnayim sheikohu, and not two people who hit at the same time. And so as a result, according to the Torah, if you have two people who together kill somebody and beat the person at the same time, then they will not be subject to execution because they did not actually, neither of them individually did the killing. And so that is that. So now we're going to try and clarify what this debate is about. And that's where Rava comes in to help us. So Amar Rava, Hakol Modim, everybody agrees, Baharog is a treifa shehu patur, that if somebody kills a treifa, meaning somebody who has a cut organ, that is not going to allow them to continue to live for a year, that person is not going to be, it's as if they are already dead, and so as a result, you're not going to be subject to execution if you kill such a person. However, the gozes bidei shamayim shehu chayiv, and if you kill somebody who is a gozes bidei shamayim, meaning that they are on their deathbed and they are about to die, but there is no apparent illness or problem with them, meaning you cannot see from the outside that there's something wrong with them. It's just either old age or some internal sickness. So then if you kill somebody, even if they're on their deathbed and they're even in potentially the throes of death, you are liable for killing them. So lo nechlaku, where do the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira argue? It's only in the following case. Lo nechlaku ela begozes bidei adam. They argue about a situation where somebody has been harmed and is on their deathbed, effectively, or in the throes of death, based on what some other person has done. Mar medami leila treifa. The rabbis compare the person to a treifa and say, therefore, you're not liable to execute that person. And when it comes to Umar, and when it comes to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, Medami Leila Gozes B'dei Shemayim, he compares them to a person who's dying from heaven, who's on their deathbed from heaven. And so as a result, therefore, you are going to be liable to the death penalty. So Madame Le Trefo, the rabbis who say that he's like a Trefa, my time alone, Madame Le Gosis B'dei Shemayim, why don't they consider him like somebody who's dying from heaven? Meaning that dying where you can't tell the disability. Goses B'dei Shemayim lo isaved be Maisa. Well, because a person who's dying from heaven doesn't have the effects of some other action that happened to him. But hi isaved be Maisa. But this person you can see the effect of the actions that were taken against that person. And one second, so why then does Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira compare the person to a dying person based on no impact, no external impact, but just from heaven? My time alone, Madame Le the Trefa. Why doesn't he consider him like a Trefa who has some internal cut organ that is clear and therefore is going to cause us to recognize that the person is going to die within the year, and therefore we should not consider the person subject, the person who kills such a person subject to Misa. So Treifa Mechatche Simanim. A Treifa actually has vital organs that have been cut. But Holo Mechatche Simanim. But a person that we're talking about, where he was beaten up, there's no clear vital organs that have been cut. They may have been damaged, they may have been hurt, but we're not dealing with a situation where the vital organs have been cut, suggesting, by the way, that if in fact somebody's vital organs were cut, well, then maybe this would be a different outcome. And we would say, that the person who kills such a person is not, in fact, subject to the death penalty because the person was, in fact, already considered dead. So we have now, again, everybody agrees when it's if the person's an actual treifa, that some vital organ has been cut, so then there's no murder for killing such a person. And everybody agrees that when it comes to somebody who's just very sick but has not been harmed by humanity, by other humans, so then if you kill that person, you're going to be liable for the death penalty. The argument is only where humans have intervened and harmed somebody, and now that person is on their deathbed. Do we consider the killing of that person like the killing of somebody who's sick from heaven, or like somebody who's a treifa? And there are reasons, again, both the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira have reasons to say in their direction.
In the case of Bidei Shemayim, where we say he's chayiv, does that refer to one person or like the scenario
definitely one
whether
person.
There were 10 people? If 10
No, definitely one person. One person. Only yes, only one person. In no case are we going to say that you can end up having two people liable for the killing of one person. So Tani Tana Kamei de Rav Sheshes. So they taught a brisa in front of Rav Sheshes that highlights this specific debate. If you again citing this verse in Vayikra Parakaf Daled Pasuk Yud Zayin, that if a person strikes all of the soul of a person, so lahavi hamaka eschavero, this deals with somebody who hits their friend, who hits somebody else. Ve'ein bo kedei lahamis, and there wasn't sufficient force to kill the guy. Uba'akar v'hemiso, and now somebody else comes and kills him. Shehu chayav. Clearly, the second attacker is going to be liable. So ein bo kedei lahamis. One second, you're telling me that the first guy didn't hit the person with a blow that was sufficient to kill, and so the second guy is going to be subject to the death penalty. Well, pshita, that's obvious. Of course the second guy is going to be subject to the death penalty. There was no reason to even think that the first guy would be liable for anything. No, Ella yesh bo kadei lahamis. No, you have to switch the brisa and understand it as where there was sufficient force in the first attack to kill the person, and yet uva akar lehemito, and now somebody else came and killed him. Shehu chayav. That second one is going to be liable. Ustama Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, and this stam brisa is just like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, because Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says in our Mishnah that if you have 9 who do damage, and then the 10th one comes along and finishes the job, the 10th one who finished the job is going to be liable for killing the guy. So Amarava, so now we have 4 now that we have this background, we're going to have 4 teachings that Rava gives in connection with a treifa.
Sounds like Makeh B'Patish. The last one,
Yeah,
one
100%.
knocks the nail into the building. He finishes the job, right?
Absolutely. On Shabbos, we would definitely say that that person is chayiv. I was thinking about that analogy myself. I agree with you completely that this is clearly different from Shabbos, where we, now it makes sense because there are going to be differences in both directions because of the concept of Malachas Masheves, that the idea is that you have a complete job that you are finishing, and your attitude that you bring to it can make a great deal of difference. And so the person who hits that, the 10th person who makes that final Makeh B'Patish is going to be liable, even though the first 9 are not going to be liable. So you're absolutely right, 100%, that this is different from that case. So let's take a look and see Rava's 4 statements. So Rava's first statement: Amar Rava haharag es treifa pater utreifa shaharag b'fnei beis din chayev shelo b'fnei beis din pater. If a person kills a treifa, then again they're not liable because again the person is considered dead already. But if the treifa kills a person, well, if he kills a person in front of the court while the court is in session, well, then the court has the ability to kill him because the court saw it and doesn't require any witnesses. But if in fact it was not, the murder happened outside of court, in the end he will not be liable. And the Gemara is going to explain why. Bifnei beis din chayiv, in front of the beis din, he's going to be liable. Diksiv uviyarta hara mikirbecha. The Torah tells us that you should remove evil from your midst, and so as a result, the court knows that this person is evil and has the ability to thereby kill the guy. But shelo b'fnei beis din pater. But if he doesn't do it in front of the court, he's not going to be liable because he's going to be exempt. Dahavula edu she'iyata yochol hazima, because the witnesses who testify against him cannot be made edim zomamin. They can't be refuted because the whole edus she'iyata yochol hazima loshma edus, and any testimony that doesn't have any possibility of becoming edim zomamin cannot become is not going to be considered valid testimony. Now, how come it can't be hazama? So then Rashi helps us out here. So it's about 3, 6, 9, 10, 12, 15, 18, about 22 or 23 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi. Shelo b'fnei beis din, v'ata ba l'chayvo al pi edim, patur. And so now you're going to try and come and make him liable due to the testimony of witnesses. Patur, but you're going to have to exempt him if the person killed, if the treifa killed not in front of the court, because ein edusan edut, because their testimony is not valid. Dahavi edus yatayocholazima, because it's testimony that cannot be refuted through hazama. L'kayim ba din hazama, because you can't do the law of hazama, because she'im huzmu. Let's say Stan and I testify against Joe Schmo that who is a treifa, that he killed X. Okay, so that's terrible. But now Ken and Moshe come and say that we're actually false witnesses. But ein harugin. But we can't be killed, because if we were to have accomplished what our testimony was set out to do, what Stan and I were trying to do was to cause Joe Schmo to be killed, but Joe Schmo is a treifa, so he's already dead. So there is no action that effectively would happen to Joe. Even if we killed Joe Schmo, it would not be considered the killing of somebody. And so as a result, because we're not actually trying to kill somebody, ein rugged, we can't be killed. De gavra katila ba'ola mikdal, because it's only somebody who is subject to killing do we want to kill. So as a result, there is no possibility of hazama here. And so as a result, if Joe Schmo, who's a treifa, tries to kills X not in front of the court, there is nothing that the court can do. That is ruling number 1. V'amar Rava haroveya es a treifa chayiv treifa sherava bifnei based in chayiv shelo bifnei based in putter. So a very similar ruling with respect to sodomy. If you sodomize a treifa, so then, but here it's on some level the opposite. That unlike killing, where you're not liable, here if you engage in sodomy against a treifa, you are liable. But if a treifa commits sodomy, bifnei based in chayav, bifshlo bifnei based in pater. Again, in front of the court, you'd be liable, but not in front of the court, you'd be exempt. Bifnei based in chayav, again, same reason, because you should remove the evil from your midst. Shalo bifnei based in pater, but when it's not in front of the court, you're not going to, you're going to be exempt to because it's testimony that can't be refuted as a result of making the person an Eidim Zomim. The witness is Eidim Zomim. So Hasulamali, why do I need to teach the same thing? Hainuhach. They are basically the same ruling. But of course, there's an important difference. Because and so that's what the Gemara answers. No, haroveya es hatrefa itzrachalei. We need to tell us that one who sodomizes a treifa is going to be liable. Because ma'u detemam, what might I have thought? Lehevi command to mashamish meis v'li pater. Because if one engages in sodomy with a cadaver, one is exempt from the capital punishment. It's not like it's a good thing, but you're at least not going to be subject to the death penalty. So kamash malan demishum hanahu v'ha isle hana. No, the point is that because although the treifa is considered on some level dead, but at the same time he does get the person who's engaging in the sodomy gets some benefit of there being of the treifa being still alive, both in the fact of the warmth of his body and, as Rashi explains, the moisture or lubrication that exists in connection with a live body. And so as a result, that's why you would be liable. And whereas if you engage in this with if you do engage in sodomy with a cadaver, you're not liable because there is no heat, there is no moisture, it's just a cold, dead body, and as a result, it's going to be considered that it's not going to have the same kind of benefit for the person, and therefore the Torah would not necessarily say that person is subject to execution. Not that you should do it, but again, not subject to execution.
But how can it be hazama in this case with the rovea?
Well, there can't be hazama. That's why if the roveya is a treifa, you would not be liable if it wasn't in front of the court.
So right, because
that part is exactly the same. The new teaching is only the fact that if somebody sodomizes a treifa, then there will be liability. That's the reason that the Rava needed to make his second statement.
Even if it's not in front of the court?
Yes, even if it's not in front of the court. Because the person against whom the witnesses are testifying is the sodomizer who is not a treifa. Yes, the person with whom he had sodomy was a treifa, but the person who was not a treifa, there is still the possibility of hazama, because now if their testimony is valid, so then the sodomizer will be executed. And now if the witnesses are made into Eidim Zomim, the witnesses can also be executed because they tried to execute somebody.
Oh, so there's hazama here.
Yes, exactly. There's hazama only if the sodomizer is the non-treifa. If the treifa, but if the treifa is the one who commits the sodomy, so then there's no hazama, and therefore there will not be liability if it's not in front of the court. It makes a difference who's doing the action.
Well, that's the case with the killing also, isn't it? Depends on who's doing it, right?
No, the point is that when it came to the killing, it doesn't make a difference. If the person who was killed was the was the treifa, you're not going to execute the murderer. And if the person who did the killing was a treifa, you're also not going to execute the murderer unless it happened right in court, because in in the first case it wasn't murder, and in the second case it's the witnesses are not subject to being Edom Zomerman. So it's different. The murder case, again, murdering a treifa, you're not liable. But sodomizing a treifa, you are liable.
So the hazama.
So the hazama doesn't apply. The question of hazama only applies to the case where the actor is a treifa. And then the law is the same, whether it's murder or sodomy. But when the act is not when the action and the actor is not the treifa, but the one who's being acted upon is the treifa, well, then sodomy and murder are different.
Okay.
Okay. But Amar Rava, the third rule that Rava gives, Edim sheheidu b'treifa behuzmu eina ragin. If witnesses testify against the treifa that he did some kind of capital crime, and now they become Edom Zomerman, they are not going to be executed. But Edi Treifa Shehuzmu Neragin. But witnesses who are a Treifa and now get discredited as a result of a Hazama, they are executed because they were trying to kill somebody. Now, Rav Ashi,
they're going to be killed. They're dying anyway.
What?
If
well,
that's
what Rav Ashi's point. Rav Ashi's disagreed.
They're dying anyway.
I know. Let me read the next line because Rav Ashi is going to disagree with Rava. No, even witnesses who are a treifa and then become Edom Zomerman, they are not going to be executed. Because the witnesses who come to make them Edom Zomerman, they themselves can't become Edom Zomerman because the person who they're trying to make an Ed Zomem and thereby kill is a treifa whose killing is not actually murder. And so as a result, they can't be considered Edom Zomerman. So Rav Ashi, and so Rashi explains here that actually the debate here is over the uniqueness of the mitzvah of Edom Zomerman. That according to Rava, the Edom Zomerman is a chiddush. The fact that and we say this often throughout Shas, that Edom Zomerman is a chiddush, because on some level, we have two witnesses that say that somebody did something. And two other witnesses say that these first two witnesses were with us at the time and couldn't have seen it. So we have effectively two witnesses saying something and two witnesses saying something. We know that one set is correct and one set is wrong, meaning they disagree. But why should we necessarily believe whoever comes second over whoever comes first? So that is what is meant by chidushu. It is not necessarily intuitive that we should believe one over the other. So because the very nature of this is not intuitive, Rava says, look, you're absolutely right that ordinarily the Edom Zomerman of a treifa, who comes and testifies, they maybe shouldn't be believed because they can't become Zomerman. But no, if we're allowing a treifa to testify, so then we're going to say that it's okay for them to be Zomerman. Whereas Rav Ashi says no. Although there's definitely unique aspects of Edom Zomerman, we're not going to go that far because we still have this principle of when you can't make Edom Zomerman, so then we're not going to accept the witnesses. As we say, and so as a result, according to Rav Ashi, even when you have witnesses who are a treifa, they effectively can never testify. So a treifa effectively can't be the victim of a murder, and they can't testify to a murder either, because again, they're not valid witnesses because they can never become Edom Zomerman.
So are we saying they're apostle edu, like say Masachik Bakubia or a relative?
Yeah, effective. Well,
they're not. They're just apostle.
I mean, it's a different category. They're not. Obviously, there's nothing. There is nothing morally wrong with them as we would say with respect to somebody who's Masachik Bakuvia, somebody who engages in gambling, then there's a moral lacking, and therefore we're worried about how they will serve as a witness. But here, it's not a moral lacking. It's the fact that their testimony can never be made zomim. And so as a result, because they can't become Eidim Zomim, so as a result, we can never believe witnesses who can't possibly become Eidim Zomim.
So, I mean, are they, if we know that the Trefot, they're from the get-go, for a priori, they're Pasul Eidud, aren't they? Or not?
That's exactly what we're saying. That's Rav Ashi's position.
So they're like,
Rava disagrees. Rava does not think that.
So they're like Krovim then, Krovim.
Yes, they're like Krovim. That's a great analogy. And that's a debate between Rav Ashi and Rava. It does seem like we paskin like Rav Ashi, that in fact that you would not be able to they would not be able to testify at all. Okay. All right.
So that you have to investigate the Eidim then to know are they Trefot or not.
Yes, 100%. You would
So
need to.
I mean, would it a posteriori, would their testimony be discarded if we find out later that they're Trefot?
So the good news is that Holchin Achar Harov B'Dinei Nefashos, we can actually follow the majority in Dinei Nefashos, and so as a result, unless we have reason to know that a person is a treifa, then we're going to assume that they're not a treifa because the majority of people are not treifot. Now, the good question is and therefore, if of course the person dies within the year, we still don't know whether he was a treifa at that moment. Now, the question is if somehow there was a way to know retroactively that he was a treifa at this moment, so then that's an interesting question about whether or not we would have to undo it. My guess is based on the fact that we in general don't undo the rulings of court. So then, again, and of course, it depends on what kind of case. It may be that this is only true, that we only won't accept a treifa in a capital case. In a non-capital case where the punishment is something less, and a treifa can get lashes. So as a result, maybe in a non-capital case, we would accept a treifa. And so if we're dealing with a capital case and the person's been killed already, well, then of course he's been killed. And if he hasn't been killed, so then maybe we would reverse our decision if it turns out that the witness turns out to be a treifa. Okay, but Amar Rava. So last of the four teachings that Rava offers, shor treifa shahara chayav. If an ox that gores and kills somebody is a treifa, so then it is going to get stoned. The shor shel adam treifa shaharag pater. But if the ox belongs to somebody who's a treifa, well, then the ox is not going to get stoned. My timer, why is that? Amarkra, Hashor Yisakel, the Gamba Alav Yumad. The Torah says, this is Pasuk in Shmo Kaf Aleph, Pasuk Kaf Tet, that it says that the ox shall be stoned and also its owner shall be executed. Now, of course, we have seen, as we saw throughout Bava Kama, that in fact we're not going to actually kill the owner, but rather he just is liable for monetary payments. And so the point is that Kol Hecha de Karena Bay V'gam Ba'alav Yumas. So only whenever there's the theoretical possibility of an owner being executed, Karina Bay Shor Yisakel. Only then will the ox be stoned. V'kol Hecha de Lo Karina Bay Gam Ba'alav Yumat. And whenever the owner cannot be executed, such as if the owner is a treifa, Lo Karina Bay Shor Yisakel. Well, then the ox cannot be stoned. Rav Ashi disagrees. Rav Ashi says the following: Rav Ashi Amar, Afilu shor treifa nami shaharag pater. Even a treifa ox that kills somebody is not going to be stoned. My timer, kevan to ilu balim havu patire shor nami pater. That based on the analogy, based on the connection of the shore to the owner, that just as if the owner is a treifa, we will not stone the ox. So too, if the ox is a treifa, we will not stone the ox. And so that is Rav Ashi's explanation. And again, Rashi in the top line of the wide lines at the bottom of Ayin Chet says the following: "De kavase kevan de ilu hor havu balim treifa de kavase lo havi mekadle." No, so then therefore he cannot be killed. So then shor treifa nami lo maktil. So as a result, the shore itself can't be killed. Dehala misas balim hukash, because it is connected to the situation of the owner. So because the two are connected, so just as when the owner isn't killed, so too if the ox is a treifa, the ox won't be killed. All right.
Does it matter if the ox is a tam or muad?
No, this is dealing with an ox that kills a person, so it doesn't make a difference. Okay. So Shisa Bo Es HaKelev. So we said the last piece of our Mishnah was that if in fact if you incite a dog or a snake, you're not going to be chayiv. But if you take a snake and you dig its fangs into somebody, we had a debate. According to the Chachamim, you're not going to be liable. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, you are going to be liable. You use the snake as a method of killing, and so you use this. You committed murder. So Amar Rav Acha Bar Yaakov b'shetim salomar. That what is this dispute about? L'divrei Rabbi Yehuda eres nachash ben shinav hu omeid. That according to Rabbi Yehuda, the poison of a snake is in its fangs. As a result, when you put the fangs into the person that you're attacking, you are literally killing them, because the snake is going to let that venom into the person. But no, according to the Chachamim, however, they say that the snake's poison, that the venom only goes out as a result of the snake wanting it to go out. As a result, the snake will get stoned for killing the person, but the person himself, but the person who did the action will not actually be executed. Okay, so now our Mishnah addresses the court's evaluation of murder weapons. So hamake eskaberu ben be'even ben be'agrov ve'amaduhu lemisa. So if in fact it's understood that the person who gets hit with this stone or this fist is one that is going to cause the person to die, and now the person gets better a bit, and then afterwards he gets worse again and dies, chayiv. According to the Tanakama, even though he got better for a little bit, and it seemed like he was going to survive, he is still liable, because the original hitting that was done in a manner that could kill. Rabbi Nechemia Omer Pator, but Rabbi Nechemia says no, you're exempt. You're not subject to liability for death. Shiraglayim ladavar, because it has something to stand on. Rashi specifically says, last Rashi on the daf, maybe the person didn't die because of this hitting, because he got better a little bit. So now the Gemara, back into the Gemara. So now the Gemara cites a brisa that explains Rabbi Nechemia's view. Okay, so Tana Rabbanan, as Zu Darash Rabbi Nechemia. This was the verse that Rabbi Nechemia learned for his principle. Im yakum v'hisalech b'chutz. If the person gets up and goes around, so goes outside. Al mishan. As we turn to now Ayin Chedam Abed, Al mishan tov v'nikama. So if it's under his own power, so then the person who did the attacking is going to be absolved. 1 second. Would you ever think that the person would get executed even though the guy got up and is now all better? Of course not. So as a result, Rabbi Nechemia understands it's the following, that we originally thought he was going to die, and now he gets better, and now he gets worse again and he dies, shehu patur. So that pasuk is telling us that in fact is going to be, he's not going to be liable. V'Rabbanan, what do the rabbis do with this? What do they do with that pasuk? They say, understand that we're going, that what do we do when we're unsure what's going to be the outcome? We imprison the guy, so we figure out what's going to happen. And then if the guy walks around in the street, so then we'll let the guy go. But until then, we're going to hold the guy so that we know what happens. Rabbi Nechemia, Chavisha Minole. Well, how does Rabbi Nechemia know that you're supposed to imprison the guy so that he doesn't run away? So Yalef Mimikoshe. We learn that from the Mikoshe, from the person who gathered stones. This is from Bamidbar Perek Tesvav, Psukim Lamed Bet to Lamed Vav, because it says Ve'anichu oso b'mishmar. They put him in custody. So Rabbanan, Nami Leilef Mikoshesh. Why don't the rabbis learn from the Mikoshesh? So Mikoshesh Bar Katalahu. No, everybody knew that the Mikoshesh was going to be subject to the death penalty. Umoshe lo havayada kadle b'may. But the Moshe didn't know which kind of death penalty, because the Torah hadn't yet told us what the death penalty was for violating Shabbos. La puke hai, but that comes to differentiate from this case. Delo yadin and ibar katalahu, ila bar katalahu. You can't learn from that case to this case, because in our case, it's not clear whether the person is going to be executed at all. So, all right, for Rabbi Nechemia, well, now Rabbi Nechemia, you need another explanation. So what's going to be your explanation? So we go to answer number 2 for Rabbi Nechemia. Yolafim Megadev. He's going to learn it from the blasphemer. Delo haviyada ibai bar katalahu b'chavashu. That was a case where Moshe imprisoned the blasphemer. This is in Vayikra Parshas Emor, at the end of the Parsha. And Moshe didn't know whether he was supposed to get executed, and so that's why they imprisoned him. So V'Rabbanan, okay, well, now the rabbis could have used that. That wasn't a case of a known death penalty, so why didn't they use that? No, Megadev Haras Shah Haisa. No, the blasphemer was a momentary rule, as Rashi tells us, that it was just at that moment, meaning it was not meant to be a law for all time, but rather they had no idea whether or not he would be subject to Misa. And so as a result, you can't say from there to anything else. Kedetanya, as we learned in the following brisa, Yodea Haya Moshe Rabbeinu Hashem Makoshesh B'Misa. Moshe knew that the Makoshesh was going to be subject to be executed B'Shnei Michal Mos Yumas, because the Torah tells us in next week's parsha, I think, that the one who violates Shabbos is going to be put to death. El Lo Haya Yodea Be'eza Misa Nera, but it wasn't clear what method of killing would be required. Shnei Kilo Forash, and that's why it says that it wasn't specifically detailed. That's the pasuk that's in Bamidbar. Aval Megadev, but when it came to the blasphemer, Lo Nemar Bo Ella El Lifrosh Lahem Al Pi Hashem. We needed to know what would be done through Hashem. Shelo Haya Moshe Yodea Imhu Ben Misa Kol Ikar Imlav, because it wasn't known whether a blasphemer would be subject to the death penalty or not. So now we have this. So that midrash highlights the fact that the rabbis could learn, highlights the fact that Rabbi Nechemia can learn from the Megadev, because it wasn't known whether he was subject to the death penalty or not. And again, the rabbis disagree and say, no, that was just a momentary law. It wasn't for all time. Now, Bishlam, Rabbi Nechemia. So now,
say that for the type of death penalty.
What was that?
Moses knew that the Megadev or the Makoshesh was chayav, but he didn't know which type of
yes, because it just says, it specifically says, again, in Shmot Lamed Hey Pasuk Yudalid Michalel Mos Yumas, that he's going to be put to death, but it doesn't detail there that he's supposed to be put to death with stoning. So that's how it was. Only when Hashem, when the Makoshesh came around, that we learned that the death is through stoning.
So there's a difference between the Megadev and this Makoshesh. One we didn't know which type of death, and we knew he was supposed to die, but in the latter case, or the Megadev, we didn't even know if he was supposed to be put to death.
That's exactly right. And that's why the Megadev is a good example for Rabbi Nechemia for why we are supposed to put in jail this person who hit somebody in a manner that would ordinarily cause death, but the victim hasn't died yet. So as a result, we put the person in jail so that until we figure out, does this person get the death penalty or does this person not get the death penalty? That's exactly how Rabbi Nechemia learns from the blasphemer case. Exactly right. So now the Gemara asks a question to the rabbi. So Bishlam Rabbi Nechemia, it makes sense according to Rabbi Nechemia, Hainu Diksive Trey Umdene, that the pasuk refers to two separate instances of evaluation, because the reference to he does not die refers to one, and the reference to him getting up refers to another. So that suggests two different moments where we have to do an estimation. So one is that we estimate that the person is going to die and then he gets up. And one that where he's going to die, then he improves, and then he dies. And so as a result, he's not going to be subject to execution in both cases. So that's why the Torah sort of uses these double phraseology. Well, why do the rabbis need two separate instances of estimation? So the Gemara answers, one applies that if you assess the person to die and then he survives, so then we're not going to kill the one who the person who hit him. And the second is where the estimation is that the force that he used was not sufficient to kill the person, and yet the person died anyway. So in that situation also, we're not going to kill the guy. For Rabbi Nechemia, well, one second, what about Rabbi Nechemia? Now we have three different cases, according to Rabbi Nechemia, that need to be non-execution cases. Again, Rabbi Nechemia needs that you don't execute the guy if you thought he was going to die and he gets up. And if you thought he was going to die, he got a little better and he died anyway. And that if he was never thought to, if the original hitting was not sufficient to kill the guy, and so therefore you thought he was going to get better, and he died right away. So all three of those you need. So Amdul L'chaim V'meis Lo Tzarakra. So according to him, according to Rabbi Nechemia, you don't need the third one. Shaharei Yatzam Beis Zakai. The guy's living, so of course he's going to be acquitted of the murder charges against him. So that's not even a thought. Okay, so Tana Rabbanan. Hamakes Chaveiro. So now the Gemara quotes a brisa that again reflects this debate. So again, if somebody hits somebody else and then and they estimate that he's going to die, and he survives, potronoso. We say that the person who did the hitting is going to be exempt. He's not subject to the death penalty. Amadula Misa, if we think that the person is going to die, and then he gets a little bit better. Omdin oso omid sheni milmamon. Now we make a second assessment to determine how much the assailant needs to pay. And now if afterwards he goes ahead and he dies anyway, we do the middle evaluation, namely the monetary evaluation. Divrei Rabbi Nechemia. That's what Rabbi Nechemia says. Meaning that if the guy originally was looking like he was going to die, but then he gets better a little bit, so we're going to get his family monetary damages. And if he now then dies, the family still gets those monetary damages, and the assailant doesn't get killed. The Chachamim omrim, but the Chachamim say no. Ein omid achar omid. We don't have a second assessment after the first assessment once we assume that the person is going to die. So then we are not going to evaluate it again, and he's just going to be killed. Tanya Idach, we have another brisa, similar argument. Amdula Misa, if we assess that the person's going to die, and then, or we can still do a reassessment and say that he's going to live. L'chaim, but if we do an assessment that the person is going to live, lamisa, we cannot reassess and say that he's going to die. Amadu lamisa, if they say that he's going to die, and then he gets better, now we do another evaluation to see how much money the assailant owes. And if again afterwards he gets worse and he dies, he has to pay all the different kinds of damages to the heirs. From when does he pay? From the time that he struck the victim. And again, this anonymous brisa follows Rabbi Nechemia. Now, the interesting thing is that it does not seem like we paskin like Rabbi Nechemia, notwithstanding that we had several anonymous brises that were like Rabbi Nechemia. But in any event, that brings us to the next Mishnah, which discusses what happens when one's intentions do not match the outcome. So, which involves and that outcome involves somebody's death. But for that discussion, please stay tuned to tomorrow's daf.
But what again, tell me is, we were thought earlier, perhaps was similar, the case was similar to Makeh B'Patish. Well, what is the distinction between that and Shabbat it seemed very similar, right?
So they're similar, but the outcomes are different. You're chayiv with Makeh B'Patish, but
Right.
but the 10th guy who hits somebody and it kills him, if unless the first 9 clearly would not have killed the guy, then you're going to be subject to the death penalty. So it's a very different outcome between murder and this other situation, and it's all based on the concept of kol nefesh. You have to, according to the rabbis, you have to fully kill the guy. If you don't fully kill the guy, you're not going to be subject to the death penalty.
But in the case where the person was killed after the 10th person, according to that one man, the Omer, who was that, Rabbi Nehemiah? I don't remember. Then that person, the 10th person, would be chayav.
Yes, according to Rabbi Nehemiah, absolutely, the 10th person would be chayav. Again, I don't think we paskin like Rabbi Nehemiah. I think we paskin like the rabbi, so that essentially, if you, it's unfortunately provides very easy ways. We'll deal with people that need to be put in jail and dangers to society, I think, in a couple of days. But you're absolutely right to highlight the fact that that this is an interesting difference between Shabbos and murder.
Well, if he, in the case of Hilchot Shabbat, that person is chayav Makeh B'Patish, right?
Correct. If the 10th person comes along, and similarly with all the steps of making a fire, etc.,
right, exactly.
In all of those situations, the last person who comes along, even if all the previous steps were necessary and he
Right.
didn't do any of them, he's still going to be liable, which is different from essentially the situation here.
Only if the person is not killed, according to Rabbi Nehemiah. But according to Rabbi Nehemiah, if that person is killed, or if the person dies, the 10th person is chayav, right?
Right. No, Rabbi Nehemiah would say that the same halacha effective. Rabbi Nehemiah applies similar principles to Shabbos, and
Right.
again, I'm not going to say it's a perfect analogy,
Right.
but it's similar principles to Shabbos and to murder.
Right.
It's the
Right.
rabbis who have
Right.
different approaches for the
Right.
two.
Okay.
All right. Looking forward to continuing our learning together tomorrow.